Hi, thank you for joining us with the St. Charles City County Library District. We're here with Tom Coscia, who has a finance background and is a distinguished Toastmaster with over 20 years experience in Toastmasters International and is the Toastmasters District Parliamentarian for this region. Tonight, we're going to talk about holding efficient and effective business meetings. Take it away, Tom.
Thank you, Brian. So we're going to talk about efficient and effective meetings. And if you have any questions as we go through this, please let me know. I'll be happy to stop and answer questions. So the first thing is an agenda. It's really important to have an agenda. And one of the things about the agenda, to get the agenda on track, is, every business should have an agenda. And then what you can do is the presiding officer should ask for the agenda items in advance. In other words, who's ever going to be at the meeting, let them know in advance what the agenda items they want to cover. So you make sure to cover everything that needs to be covered. And then as a courtesy, the agenda should be sent out in advance to all the attendees so they know what to expect. Now, sometimes if you have a lot of things, a large agenda, it may be a good idea to add times to your agenda so that when you have speakers, they know how long they are allowed to speak. Plus, it keeps your meeting from running needlessly long. So adding agenda times is a good way to handle that. And I'm going to talk, I am a parliamentarian for Toastmasters, and I'm just going to touch on parliamentary procedure because it's not necessarily required, but sometimes it's part of some of these meetings. But if you're using parliamentary procedure, your agenda should be adopted at the beginning of the meeting. So if everyone adopts the agenda, that's how you hold them to that agenda for the meeting in parliamentary procedure. Any questions about the agenda?
Yeah, I have kind of a quick one. How would you handle, perhaps, say you send it out and you request agenda items, and you have somebody who's trying to, say, pack the agenda with stuff that's more relevant to them and perhaps less relevant to the overall topic? How do you usually go about that? Do you have a discussion or just leave it off?
So you're saying that it does not involve with what your role is? It's more.
Well, so for instance, you pass out the agenda or you request agenda items, and somebody gives you a list of 5 things that you won't have time to cover all of them.
Okay.
May not be as on point as you would like for the meeting. Might expand the role of the meeting beyond what you had intended.
Okay. So I would go back to that person and say, this is beyond maybe the scope of this committee, or that maybe we can't address everything now. We'll have to address some of it later on. But you can, as a presiding officer, you can kind of curate what you will and what you won't talk about if you feel that it's not appropriate. Does that answer that?
Sure. Thank you.
Great. So the next thing that's important is minutes. Okay. So every business meeting should have someone to record the minutes. And ideally, it should not be the person leading the meeting, because it's sometimes really hard to lead a meeting and make sure that everything that's appropriate is written down and covered. So what is minutes? It should be, when it happened, where it happened, who intended, and the decisions made. Okay. It can also be really beneficial to highlight action items. Okay. In other words, who's going to do something, what are they going to do, and when are they going to do it by? Have you ever had a meeting where somebody says, okay, we're going to do this, but if you don't assign anybody to do it, or you don't tell them when that has to be done, who knows when it'll happen? So if you want to have it be effective, it's really critical that you know who it is, what they're doing, and the deadline, when you want it done. And that'll make it much more, minutes will be more effective. Now, one thing, sometimes think a minute should be a transcript of everything that was said. No, it's not, because you don't want to read all that. It's basically the key decisions that were made, and if there were key votes too, but really it's the things that were decided on that should be in those minutes. Now, at the next meeting, those minutes should be approved to make sure that whatever was written down was right or correct. And when you give out the minutes to be approved, you don't necessarily have to sit there and read the minutes. You can send it out in advance, and they can read it on their own, and then you can approve it. But you don't have to sit there and read what happened at the last meeting, just as long as they have it in writing or in advance. And then ideally, those approved minutes should be published for reference so that people can see it or question it. If they missed a meeting, they know what happened. But if you can put it somewhere so that it's an official record and people have access to it, that would be ideal for any organization. They shouldn't be hidden or nobody else can see it. Any questions on minutes? All right, moving on. The next thing is reports. And all key members or officers should have the opportunity to make a report. And then after they do the report, there should be an opportunity at the end of each report to ask questions. If there's, so they make the report and hopefully they're within time, and then they're given an opportunity to ask questions. Now, if the report is recommending a proposal, a change, a person making the report can make the proposal. And then at that point, if you're in parliamentary procedure, you would need a second for that proposal, unless the proposal is from a committee. If it's from one person, you would need a second to talk about it. But if the committee that they represent made the proposal, then it does not need a second. So they would make their proposal, and then you should allow time for discussion on the proposal. And after discussion, the proposal can then be voted on. Any questions about reports? All right, moving on. Unfinished business. Okay, so there should always be an agenda items that were discussed in a past meeting, but were not voted on. And they can be brought up. Now, sometimes people call it old business. Everything is old business. You should not use the term old business. It's always unfinished business. Number 5, new business. This is the opportunity for anyone on the floor to bring up new business. So in parliamentary procedure, all new business should be brought up as a motion. It can't just be, let's talk about this or that, or just, I want to talk about the upcoming fair. You just can't do that. You have to bring it up as a motion. Okay. So when it's brought up as a motion, then if it's seconded, it can then be discussed. And then at the end of the discussion, it can be voted on. Any questions about new business? All right. So this is a part about holding effective meetings that will make a difference. Okay, and this is the secret. Okay. You make sure that in the minutes, there should be a list of action items, including who will be taking the action and their deadline. So make sure that is in the minutes. And then following the meeting, it could be a good idea to send a preliminary draft of the minutes to everyone, highlighting who will be doing what actions in their timeline. So following the meeting, right afterwards, because sometimes people don't write things down, or they don't remember, but you have it in writing, you get it out to them after the meeting. And so hopefully they have time to get it done. And then the key thing is that at the end, when sending out the agenda for the next meeting, you again include the minutes draft. And ideally, it'll remind people if they need to complete an item by the next meeting. So hopefully this will prompt them that by the next meeting, hey, this is supposed to happen. Here are the minutes. Be ready for it. Any questions about that? All right. So really, that is the basic part of having good meetings. So the key thing is having a agenda that's sent out in advance that people can vote on, that has times, that you have someone taking the minutes, that's doing it so that you highlight action items, who, what, when, and that it could be minutes are approved so that people know that it's official and should be saved, and that you have reports that people give and people can ask questions, and that they can make a proposal that you can vote on. And then you have an option for unfinished business, the old business, and you have an option for new business. So with that, and when you send that action, those action items out in advance, right after the meeting and right before the next meeting, hopefully that'll happen and you'll get things done. So that is my presentation, and I will now entertain any questions.
Tom,
Yeah.
I had a question about the minutes. Like after a meeting, is there an acceptable time? I mean, how quickly do you need to get those minutes out to people? I mean, I know you talked about doing before the next meeting, but is there a time?
Well, sometimes, a lot of times depends on what's your frequency of meetings. In other words, if it's a weekly meeting, obviously you don't have much time. If it's a monthly meeting, the other thing is that if there are things that have to happen between now and the next meeting, it may be good to try to get those minutes out earlier. But if there's nothing that is really critical, they don't really need in advance, I mean, you can wait to right before the next meeting and just get it out then.
Okay.
It just depends on what you're trying to accomplish with the minutes.
Okay.
If you're trying to get people to do things, I get it out sooner. If it doesn't matter, then you can wait till right before, or even, I wouldn't necessarily, ideally you should do it, send it prior to the meeting. I mean, you could show up at the meeting and have them read it, but then they have to take the time to read the minutes.
Yeah.
And then they lose valuable time in the meeting while people are looking over the minutes. So it's ideally to get it to them in advance. And
Okay.
so does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you.
Great.
I'd like to thank you for taking the time to share with us this evening. Your presentation skills and outline were done excellently. I do appreciate
Okay, thank you.
that you put into it. You made some excellent points. I represent an organization, Rotary International.
All right.
Once a year, we rotate all of our club officers out and put in new ones, part of the leadership development skills of our organization. We do spend a great deal of time and effort trying to help our new leaders understand how to effectively lead their clubs and do club meetings. And, this little outline that you put together would make such a nice, easy to follow guide for our president-elects as they, learn to lead their clubs for the next year. I just was, as I was listening, it's hard to look at running a meeting on electronics, Zoom or whatever, as compared to running it in person. And another interesting little sidelight of the presentation might be the differences between organizing a meeting that we're not all in the same room versus where folks are scattered, all over a community or all over a state. It might be an extra little chapter for the next presentation you put together. But thank you so much for sharing. I enjoyed it. It was excellently done.
Do the Rotarians, do they use parliamentary procedure?
Um, it depends on which business meeting you're sitting in. Most of the clubs are fairly informal, but at district level and zone levels, yes, it is strictly a parliamentary procedure. So it depends on the setting.
Right. And I understand. It's the same thing. Toastmasters in this case, I remember Toastmasters and Rotarians are very similar in that respect. At a club level, you don't necessarily do the parliamentary procedure, but I'm also on the district level and we do. And what I was going to suggest is that if you want the easiest way to manage parliamentary procedure is the book, it's just like a dummies book.
Right.
So I'd recommend these kind of books if you're trying to learn parliamentary procedure. This is the official guide, is the Robert's Rules of Order. This is the 12th edition. Actually, it just came out last month in September. It comes out every 10 years. And this one deals more with virtual things. So this is the big book if you really want the nitty gritty. But when I first started learning parliamentary procedure, get one of those dummies guides. They're great. You'll learn a lot. For those people that need to learn it.
Have you found that it's pretty important you mentioned using district. Is it pretty important for that setting?
Yes, it is, because, we have people make proposals, then you have second, then you have discussion, then you have votes, and then, it's very critical. And then even at the international level, it's even more critical. You have to really know your parliamentary procedure and if you know parliamentary procedure, you can get a lot of things done. So it just depends on the organization. And I just touched on a little bit because, I've been involved with PTO meetings or seen them, and they use some form of parliamentary procedure. So, okay. Well, thank you, Harry. I appreciate the feedback. Any other questions? All right. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to present this to you. I hope you got something out of it. If you want to learn more about just public speaking, or even we do a lot of parliamentary procedure, but Toastmasters is a good organization for that. And that's part of what I'm part of. And I would encourage you to check it out.
Thank you very much for presenting tonight, Tom. Again, that was Tom Coscia from Toastmasters International. And real quick, before we cut out, I wanted to bring up some other library programs that might be of interest. If you enjoyed this, tomorrow we have Librarians Read in the Dark. We're going to have an evening reading spooky stories with the St. Louis County Public Librarians, and that's tomorrow at 7 p.m. And next month, on November 8th, we have another presentation by Toastmasters International for our How-To Festival. And that is Learn How to Deal with the Fear of Public Speaking. Get tips on how to give a speech and learn where to find more information. And again, that is November 8th. So if there are no more questions.
Brian,
Yes, ma'am.
if I can interrupt you just a minute. For
Sure.
anybody that joined us late, this presentation will be on our library website, mylibrary.org. If you just go to our calendar of events, you can find it there, and you will see the whole recording, and it will be up for at least 30 days, right, Brian?
Yes, it will.
Okay. That's it.
All righty. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
All right.